I had to reboot. So sorry about the wait. Well, how have you been?
I've been great. How have you been?
I've been fine. I've been fine. This is our second talk, so
Yeah.
I'll have to find, well, our second talk in this way. You've been on the Discord and
Yeah, of course.
we've chatted that way. Well, what's on your mind for today?
Yeah, I have of course, as usual, I have a whole bunch of questions and concerns.
Okay.
But, yeah. So I have some some more pragmatic questions as well as some of the usual theoretical questions which I would like to ask you your thoughts on.
Okay. Well, let's jump right in.
Yeah. So like what I've been thinking about lately has been the relationship between dialectic and this inexhaustible moreness or this otherness of God, and the dialectic that so this is going on the theoretical side of it. The reality seems to present itself to us in this way where again we have always, no matter what we're trying to break down, no matter what we're trying to comprehend and understand, there's this thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis part that we do. And reality just presents itself to us in a way where no matter what we do, it seems that there are mutually contradictory truths, which seem to be true in and of themselves. And within this, there's the confusion of, suppose if you're looking at it from the Christian angle, within it, we're always trying to figure out, are these, which parts of reality are, like, and from my perspective, again, from my Christian denomination, which parts are part of God's design and which parts are due to the fall or whatever, the human original sin, which parts are because of our let's start with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Big. Well, your first statement, I mean, inexhaustible moreness and otherness are related, but they're not exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. So, my God number one, God number two, holy, holy, holy is God number two. That's inexhaustible otherness. Mm-hmm. Inexhaustible moreness is found in God one and God two. So, and I mean, the point that you raised, the second point that you made, no matter what we do, we find contradictory truths presenting themselves. Which part of the reality are part of God's design and which parts are corruption? And, right there, we're sort of, non-dualist Bob, who's, grew up the son of a Christian Reformed minister who stalks me on Twitter and YouTube comment sections lovingly. I mean, the whole point about monism or non-duality is that distinction that you just laid out, which is deep within Christianity. That distinction is illusory. And so obviously in certain ancient religious and metaphysical systems, their assertion is that the distinction is illusory, which then of course leads to the duality of seeing it and not seeing it. Mm. And so that's the point I keep making with Bob. He keeps pushing non-duality. Okay, you got non-duality and you have duality. So now you've got another one. And you're exactly right. These things just keep arising. And theologically, who was I talking to the other day? I was talking to, I've had this conversation with a few people. There's a Sikh who comes to my meetups sometimes, and he was, Sacramento is just like the United Nations in terms of people, and my neighborhood in particular is very United Nations-ish with varying samplings from all over the place. But so he's a Sikh, and he's got his graduate degree now, and he's looking for work right now, which I really feel bad for. He's hoping to teach, comparative religion or something in a secular college, like a community college. His mother teaches in a community college. And so he was in the neighborhood dropping someone off. And so he knocked on my door and he says, I can never get a slot. I says, I'm a lot easier to get to in person than I am on the internet, but which is a good thing because there's a lot more people on the internet. But I was talking to him about the fact that Christianity and my tradition in particular is always dealing with, so this one guiding light of my little sub-Christian tradition of Christianity, Abram Kuyper. Abram Kuyper was just an interesting polymath. He founded a university, he founded a newspaper, he was prime minister of the Netherlands, he founded a split-off denomination that merged with another denomination. I mean, the guy how on earth in one lifetime did he do so much? Well, the Netherlands is a small country, cut down on travel time. But so he was a guy who emphasizes both the antithesis, which is exactly the aspect you pointed out, but also common grace. And so once we have this duality, then of course, I was talking to someone the other day who's been listening to a lot of Eric Weinstein. Eric Weinstein calls them superpositions, and it's sort of Hegelian. So you have thesis and, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And so, the dualities very quickly become triune. And these things, we human beings are not going to resolve them. Now, why is that? So I was listening this morning because I'm thinking about doing a video on Game B, which suddenly when I saw the Rebel Wisdom, the story of Game B, it was like, oh, now I understand why Brett Weinstein makes the kind of noises he does. He's been having these conversations over here. Now it all sort of fits together. And so when you're thinking sort of in that secular-ish space that has a bias against theism, or especially Christian theisms, and you see these patterns emerge all over the place, it kind of makes you want to watch more Jonathan Pageau, because Pageau, of course, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with Pageau is that part of the power of symbolism, the weakness of symbolism and the power of symbolism, as is often true, are sort of the same thing. You can map it all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, pointing out this aspect of the Christian story, well, why do we bump into this all the time? Now, the simulationists will say, well, that's the coding of the simulation that we're in. Well, okay. Theists will say, this is the project of God. And that you can find ideas like that in the church fathers. And there was recently a row at Calvin College over some couple of professors that were sort of dabbling in this in a little too much of a public way to indulge in some supralapsarian thinking, and got shown the door. So, yeah. What do you think? I don't have an answer for you.
And I was just thinking before, like, maybe I could ask some, like, maybe I could ask some questions which you could maybe answer, maybe if you were not even going to release this conversation in a way, like maybe even just keeping in your mind that you're not going to release the conversation, because for me, a lot of it is not, so with the topic I brought up, I don't bring it up just out of pure idle curiosity. Like, the thing is, I focus on this one question: what is it? What development could happen in the world? What thing could be revealed in reality, or what could I find out about the past, but in a way which is convincing enough, which could actually cause me to all but lose my faith? Like, what I mean, and I feel that if I were to make an honest reading of the Bible, and not just the Bible, an honest take on the Christian faith, I do feel that there are certain things which, if revealed in the spirit of honesty, I would not be able to hold my faith in the light of those things. There would be no way for me to reconcile, and the thing that frightens me is that there are people who I respect and thought leaders who I feel would and maybe this is just my own projection of them, but I do feel that they would try to reconcile even these things which I feel are irreconcilable, should they present themselves in reality. And an example of that would be, like I was talking when I had the conversation with I think Karen from the Meaning Code. I was saying that if
With who?
is it Karen from the Meaning Code, or is it somebody? Is it
Oh,
the Meaning
Karen. Yeah, Karen
Code?
from
Yes.
the Meaning Code. Yeah.
And I said that it was a simple, I mean, almost silly example. If I were to discover that there were aliens, if I were to discover that if there was any life, that would be very hard for me to reconcile with the metaphysics which drives me to accept Christianity. So that's just one example. So, but just as a side note, but the broader point that I'm trying to make is that when dealing with this dialectic nature of reality and trying to figure out which parts are part of the original design, I mean, that is the great hope of Christianity, is that there is this, like, as you said, this dualism, that there is this, which would point ultimately to God's goodness. But if reality were, if there wasn't this dualism, it would be very hard, again, for me to accept the goodness of God, and the whole stack of cards would start to fall down. So that's my question to you. What do you think? What could present itself in reality that would cause you to be, which would be irreconcilable? What scientific development? What could you discover?
That's a really good question. And obviously the question for each of us is answered individually, because there are many people for whom, and I've been paying some attention to it on my channel. There are many people for whom something happens and they give up their faith. Perseus Lewis, so Lewis is in many ways a forerunner for so many of the conversations we've been having, because it's the same conversation I had with Raj yesterday here in my office. He was born to a lovely woman and a rather cold, withholding father, and she dies at age 6, and father doesn't quite know what to do with him, and so they try English boarding schools, and they're a disaster, and so finally hooks him up with the father's old tutor, who is who makes Sam Harris look like a lightweight. And that's where Lewis really gets his education, from this guy who has completely deconstructed and debunked Christianity angrily and means it personally. And then, of course, Lewis takes that and fully embraces that and goes off to the First World War, and has the right kind of wound that sets him out for the rest of the war. But the buddy with whom he has a pact dies in the war, and he winds up having a sexual relationship, a long-term sexual relationship with the guy's mother, and he's a nerd, and somewhere along the way at Oxford he bumps into Tolkien and eventually becomes a theist, and then becomes a Christian, and had in many ways was able to square all of the suffering that he had endured. When I listen carefully to people who I deeply respect for their honesty, their sincerity, the rigor, and I think the rigor and authenticity, I hate to use that word, but it's probably the best one, with which they pursue these questions and say, I just can't believe that there is a good consciousness which set this whole thing in order and will at the end of it take responsibility for it. I respect them after they say it. And when I heard Eric Weinstein say, the problem with a God is that once you have one, you have to worry about what's on his mind. Yeah, that he put it into words, I think, what sits at the heart of this. That, it sounds so cliche, and of course, it's obviously something that couldn't be scientifically verified or or debunked, it would in some ways be the bones of Jesus Christ. Because for me, I can do the math from a postmodern point of view where I can say, I have all these reasons, and many of them are personal. Why should I go off and try and be a Buddhist in North America? That just sounds dumb. Yeah. Because all of the resources available to me, all of the diversity of the Christian ecosystem, I'm living in the middle of it. I was raised in the middle of it. I'm 50 years old. Why start on something new? It just doesn't make much sense. So that's a very pragmatic argument. And so I can, at least for myself, easily make the argument that my sunk costs in the Christian faith are so significant that why start down another road at this time? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't yet push me over the edge. I keep coming back to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And maybe I'm too much of a modernist and not sufficiently postmodern on that score, because I can make a pragmatic argument that, yes, I am happier. I have a more meaningful life swimming within the Christian pond. But the real excitement, it gets so much deeper when I contemplate the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because that suggests to me that what Jesus said was trustworthy. And if what Jesus says is trustworthy, then, well, the Hebrew scriptures, and you can't understand at least the witness of the followers of Jesus Christ without understanding their relationship with the Hebrew scriptures. Both we have Jacob in the Discord channel who is, I love our heretics. They keep me honest, and when Jacob says, well, I'm really interested in that Jesus, because I haven't posted that video yet. I should probably post that one. He was this Messiah figure, but Paul, I can't stand. And just this morning, I was thinking about how Paul, who is this Hellenistic Jew, I hear this through Tom Wright and Tom Wright and Tom Holland, just remaps. So I'm listening to these Plan B guys, and I'm thinking, you're all putzes compared to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul and these letters that he wrote, on the back of Jesus, re-terraforms history. Now the Plan B people are like, wow, that's spent. And the Rebel Wisdom. So, I love David and Ali, but the real undercurrent that David always gives is, even though he was raised a Methodist, Christianity, it's spent. And I just keep thinking, yeah, but this is the religion of a dude who dies and comes back to life. And Chesterton had a point. So to me, really, if somehow the resurrection and I knew that the resurrection was not historically plausible. And I think that's where, in terms of a scientific framework, where we're left. The resurrection is plausible. But if that is plausible, and as C.S. Lewis made the point in Miracles, that's sort of the missing thing in the middle of the chapter that makes the whole story make sense. So for me, that would be tough. It's not so much suffering because, again, of Jesus. So that's why I'm a Christian.
I totally respect that answer, because I'm sure there are so many people who would not have that one thing if it were exposed. I mean, if it came to light, that they would not be able to, because that just speaks to your honesty. Because if there is no such thing, and Christianity is just this malleable thing which is just an overlay that we moral therapeutic deism that we put on top of reality at the end of it, which does not make any specific claims about ontology, then I mean, I from pragmatically, spiritually, from any perspective, it would be very hard for me to stick to it. And I would, that too would, of course, the same thing would check. And again, when I say it's not the suffering itself that would shake my faith, but it's more the fact that if it were to, because for me, I think I mentioned once in your comment section, the fact that there is a God, that just has to be one of the possibilities on the table because of all those reasons. Is it what is it, consciousness all the way up, consciousness not downwards, but all the way up to this point and then not beyond. That it just stands to reason that it's got to be on the table as one of the possibilities. But the goodness of God, or the goodness or the nature of this consciousness, is is the question which rankles with me. Like because I have no doubt about consciousness in our, because nature itself has its own, people might say just intelligence or but I would say it has its own form of consciousness, because it does, in many of the ways which I've been talking about in the comment section, it does tend, it has a way of, you can't, as you said, you can't treat it as something that's, you have to treat it with the spirit of geometry. And further, I believe that ontologically it has personhood. It's not just that you are, there is some, I don't know what form that is, because again, principalities, powers, those are beyond my grasp. I don't know what form they take. But again, there, sometimes I want to even back away from this hedging that I'm doing there, because I'm saying I don't know, because I think there's a hedging there that, again, because I think because of the scientific bias, we on a lot of these issues we try to hedge in the, as I said, hedge in the frontier of knowledge, because we don't know. But I think I think we also should, I mean, especially as me as a Christian, if I truly want to operate with Christianity as my paradigm, with the option that at some point, like, there are these things which could disprove, but if I want, and not just operate with science as my paradigm, I mean, scientism or whatever, our science being, I don't know what worldview we could brand that with, but, and instead of just operating with that as my base paradigm and then using the Christianity on top of it. So
yeah, and it's, you know, I mean, we have to at some point, self-knowledge requires that we, as we mature, gain a capacity to look with greater and greater third-personness at ourselves. And I don't want to say objectivity, because again, I think that bends a knee to this monarchical vision that we idolatrously grasp at. But at least a third person position, or third person observer on ourselves. And we have access to that because we're in a world with 8 billion other third persons who, with very little coaxing, will usually feel more than free to offer up a commentary on any of us and what we're thinking or doing at the moment. So it's this, we have to understand that a human being can be no other way than shaped and formed by the world of the whole show that led to their instantiation. And so it's the whatever Jewishness from my father's side and the Frisian stubbornness from my mother's side and the third generation of Christian ministerism and now the Jordan Peterson conversations. I mean, all of that has come into me. And so in a Sam Harris sort of way, I could say, well, I'm no more than the sum of all of this show. Oh, okay. But this consciousness business, you know, I was listening to Game B, and Jim Rutt was making the point that, you know, his Game B conversations, one of the lines they split across was the, you know, basically consciousness. And part of the tribe said, hey, you can't set aside consciousness. And Rutt's like, that's bullshit, you know, unless you can show it to me. And again, to me, it's like Sauron saying Tolkien is bullshit. You know, unless you can show me J.R.R. Tolkien, I'm not going to buy that he has anything to do with what's going on here with Saruman and Gandalf. And,
yes,
you know, it's like, oh, okay. But, you know, we deny the most obvious tool we live in, we work in every day. And you just have to at some point say, that just seems crazy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you again, which goes back to the point. It's like the fact of these any an immaterial metaphysical reality is just the very people who seem to deny its existence seem to utilize it. I mean, I can't think it's unconsciously. I can't believe that it's unconsciously, because especially with someone like Eric Weinstein, who I, like you, have been listening to a lot. Because again,
okay, we're back in business, even though I'm using this crappy integrated camera. So I'll have to fix this later. But you were on a roll, and it was a good roll, and I got it recorded, so it isn't lost. So that's a good thing.
Again, like I said, I'd rather not have this even released, but just rather get like the full force of your honesty.
Well,
so without having to worry about anything. Not that I'm saying that you do tone down what you're saying for, but I'm sure that there is some aspect.
But the honesty is an important point. And again, I mean, you're the victim of the fact that I'm thinking about making another video. But, you know, one of the things Brett Weinstein makes a point about with his concerns about his Plan B aspirations is that, you know, the world is insanely complex, and part of the bottom line we all have to navigate is in fact the continuation of our of me, and part of what happens when you get older, you know, and now, you know, my last child is in college, and so I've gotten 4 through. You know, 2 have stable employment. Okay, 1 is 2 now. 2 girls are in the job market, and it's so funny because, you know, my woke daughters, you know, women in STEM, and it's like, well, why didn't you go into STEM? I didn't want to. Gosh, why on earth might that be? Because maybe you're a woman, and maybe you love people, and that's all a good thing. But, you know, so I'm getting to the age now where, you know, I don't have many career aspirations left. The demand on me of, you know, giving my young a good start in the world is declining. You know, in many ways, my honesty is a function of the dramatic failures in my life, which again sounds crazy, but in Christianity makes perfect sense, because the more you get into, as Christians would say, the grip of the world, the less honest you can be. The more you have to be a non-player character. And that's why old people can be so delightful, because they tell you what they think. It's just like, I'm going to die in a decade or less. So, you know, here's what I think. What are they going to do? Lock me up? How much more years do I have? So that's, you know, that's part of the freedom. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. The older I get, the more I understand that line.
And what you were just what you were just talking about, it kind of is another parallel to the same what I'd say is what the modern culture seems to have completely borrowed from. I'd say the defunct version of Christianity, which has been at play for the maybe defunct is too strong word, but I'd say, I don't know what word to use, decadent Christianity that's been at play for the past, so I don't know how many ever years, but just the sort of impotent symbolism that we see, like I've just seen being exemplified, including by myself in my church, but it's all about just the symbolism and the fact that it, again, adds meaning to my life, which is literally moral therapeutic deism, except via the church with the theological substrate. But the fact that this sort of impotent symbolism has now been transferred directly into the secular world, and that's why you can have, again, not to pinpoint your daughters, but have people who have the propositional beliefs which are not in concert with the performed or the way the enacted beliefs. So that and that brings me to the more pragmatic aspect of the questions I wanted to ask. Like, when it's not, I don't want to phrase it, how will the church survive, but what does the church add when we are just exemplifying in our own way this sort of a complete rift between propositional belief or articulated belief and then enacted belief? How could we ever bridge this gap? Because if I were to try and go and if I'm going to try and convince or whatever, if I'm trying to go and sway somebody within the secular realm who's taken on board all the bankrupt ideologies or secondary versions of Christian theology in the secular scheme, what they're going to, an astute member of that clan is going to point at me and say, but you have the exact same problem. So how would you address that?
I think it's helpful. So it's a trope that someone outside, and it's not just a trope by, brainiacs on Twitter and the internet, in the intellectual dark web. Any mope walking down the street, if you mention the church, I can't go to a church because it's full of hypocrites. And part of me says, oh yeah, like unlike everything else I see. But another part of me recognizes, yeah, and the salient hypocrisy of the church is a function of its astounding aspirations and claims. And that's part of the reason why I think when a lot of Christians deconstruct, they just feel relief. Because it's like, you know what? All right, I can smoke weed and do porn, and I can stop playing the religious games that everyone else is. I can be less duplicitous. And yeah, because part of what a church community does is hold people accountable to this standard. But the person who points at the hypocrisy of the church will, in the next moment, find a soapbox and stand on it and declare that humanity must be preserved. Politics must do better. Our institutions are failing us. Look at George Floyd. Here's a dramatic instance of the failure of the police. So, and then, some young activist will say, let's abolish the police. And anybody who actually, it's like, it's like a 21-year-old saying, abolish Social Security. And all the 65-year-olds say, uh-huh. Yeah, it's easy to say when what's salient to you are all of the failures of that system. But just go to another place in the world on a vacation and see what a defunded police force looks like. I'll show them the corner to stand on. And, it's like, so Christianity has this claim of everything. And then the church says, come into our midst and taste and see that the Lord is good, and get a sense of the new community that will go forever. And you walk in the place and the music's crappy, and the preacher's dull, and everyone else has all of the garden variety difficulties that you'll find in any PTA meeting. And you say, this is the vision of the new way. And so then higher achievers like Bill Hybels will, be a control freak and make sure the music is excellent and make sure the preaching is excellent, and fine tune all the sociology so it can be a safe space to hear a dangerous message and all of that. But, Bill's got trouble in his own marriage, and, is tempted to sleep with the hotties and that with the beautiful voices that he's put on stage. And, this is us. And here's the crazy thing, that you would think if Jesus were to, if you if a modernist would go about Jesus' ministry, they would look a lot like the game B people. Well, we're going to get really smart people, and we're going to curate these conversations, and we're going to, and politics, well, no, not quite. They figured that out. And, you know, and it's like, yeah, but then read the Bible and look how Jesus did it. It's insane. And you would think it's insane if it didn't really happen. Well, what happened? Well, that's even hard to say. So, yeah, you know, the church is a mess. Fair enough. But why is it still here? Well, it's got something that we can't put our hand on, and it's some inexhaustible otherness that's at work, that no matter how hard we try to distill it and wield it, we always fail at wielding it, but it keeps coming back. Well, at some point you begin to say, well, is there another agent at work? Is that agent conscious? Does that agent have a plan? The truly disturbing notion that comes across our minds when we get to that point is, well, then I'm sort of a node in the network. Well, Sam, isn't that what you said we were? You know, why suddenly in a theist realm you're losing your stuff, but in an atheist realm you feel comfortable with it? It's because you realize that in the theist realm, your lack of agency is not only exposed, but potentially exploited. And that wounds your pride. So to me, again, this is what's at the heart of the Western experiment to keep Christianity, but tell God, thank you very much. We'll take it from here. And it's so funny.
And of course, I agree with you on virtually every point you made there, except the point that I do focus on is, again, as if the church, again, this is completely on a practical question that may be of little interest to those of more secular mind, but if Christians are supposed to be the salt of the earth, is it enough for us to then point out that, well, yeah, we're corrupt, but then so is everyone else. Yeah, we're hypocrites, but so is everyone else. And that's just the human condition. Or in the decisions that we make within the manifest image as the church, the decisions that, and I remember there was this, I don't know, I never read the book, but there was this book that people kept pushing on me back when I was in Sunday school called Radical. I don't know if you've heard of it.
What is it called?
Radical.
Radical. I haven't read it.
I never read it myself, but basically the gist of it was, and I would just point to that because there was this sudden push to do away, I mean, and that's been reflected broadly during that time, the push to move away from just the religiosity to the more radical side of Jesus' ministry. But, and of course, I know there are lots of theological problems with just diving into that, and we see that with the modern social justice phenomenon, where people just want, in fact, they don't just want the radicalness of Jesus divorced of the theology, but they want the radicalness of Jesus divorced of Jesus now. So you have like this. That's right. So you have that situation here, but at the same time, sometimes we can kind of punt and point to that. We point to all these flaws with following these notes in order to like forget that simple message, which I do think is part of the Protestant. We did get right. I mean, we are going into all these, and again, I'm getting a growing appreciation for all the things which I just, as a good Protestant, wrote off from the beginning, the rituals and the symbolism and the liturgy, all this stuff. I am gaining a huge amount of respect for that. But still, that one grain that was present in Protestantism, which was the radicalism, which was the universalism, all those things which again have gained such resonance across the world in the secular realm, but we're losing sight, especially of this radicalism and this call to be the salt of the earth, which in turn, if this from the manifest image were to now manifest in reality, the amount of goodness that we were able to portray were to manifest, and not just in the simple, the facetious ways that were taught to me when I was in Sunday school, like just the goody two-shoes type of stuff, but the true radicalness, like which mimics Jesus, of course, never attains it, but mimics his way of being, the truly self-sacrificial, and not just self-sacrificial as in, I did a few good things for a few people sometimes, like, but truly like to the point where life is absolutely forfeit. This could happen within the manifest image of the church, and that could then be out there ontologically speaking, where people could point to it. And it would be a very difficult thing if this true mission of the church were to manifest in reality. And we were not just to focus on the fact that we're all stuck in the muck. That could be out there as an ontological proof, which people could point to, because it's in this zone which is both ontological and the manifestation. So that's.
I agree 100%. I stopped reading books like that about 15 years ago because I'd read dozens of them and they all began to sound the same. And you nicely articulated it. You know, the church right now faces a wonderfully comfortable but terribly lethal situation of its own affluence and success. And I think this is part of Chesterton's cycles about the 7 deaths of the faith. And you know, John Wesley pointed this out. And the truth about us as human beings is that we often don't get radical again until we get to the point of having nothing left to lose. And, you know, you see this, again, a go-to illustration that I got from Tim Keller in this is Eric Liddell, the sprinter, who, you know, was a deeply pious Christian man and a world-class sprinter, and, you know, went off to become a missionary in China. Unfortunately, in the 30s, when the Japanese were trying to eat China, realizing that China, they had bigger eyes than their stomach, as my mother used to say, and their eyes were bigger than their stomach. And so Eric Liddell was in a Chinese internment camp, along with a bunch of other missionaries and expats and business people and diplomats and all of that. And, you know, a completely secular book written by a man who did not convert to Christianity, in this book reflects on this one guy, and because he wrote a book reflecting on his time in the internment camp, and wrote this book reflecting on this one guy. All the other missionaries out there, you know, they were just, when you put them in an intern camp, they were just kind of, they devolved to be like everyone else. But this one guy, you know, he just, and the quality of his character shown in all the predictable ways that anybody going to Sunday school, or even just about anybody else in post-Christendom, can recognize, is the self-sacrificial purity of his offering. And he dies. And so, and you see this throughout the history of the church, you know, St. Francis, another one. But, you know, when St. Francis is doing his thing, how many people see it? You know, at least the thing about Tank Man is there was a photographer. But then we think that, well, if we just show people that icon, because in a sense, you know, the picture of Tank Man is an icon of something. If we just show people that icon, then that will do it. And it's like, well, then I get back to my Calvinist roots and say, I don't think there's a formula we wield here, boys and girls. And so then we punt up to say, what finally changes people? Well, it's the Holy Spirit. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, what do you mean by God? So it's, again, we're agents. We're real agents. Our agency is vital, and we're held responsible for our agency. But we are awfully small agents in a very big world, and we're barely even in control of ourselves. So no, I love your points. And the beauty, you know, so I worked with, you know, pastors and what they called preachers in the Dominican Republic my first 7 years. And then I came to Sacramento. And then for my first 10, 12 years here, I worked with church planters. And I love the spirit of church planting, because in many ways it expresses exactly what you have, or you say, you know what, I'm dissatisfied with the church, because when I read this book and when I see the church, there's a difference, there's a delta between them. And you know what? I'm going to have the boldness and audacity to do it right. And when someone walks up to me and says that, I say, you go to it, and I will pray for you, and I want to see you succeed. But I've been through this cycle enough that a few years they'll come back to me and be like, you know, gosh, you know, I'm becoming all of these B-level failed church planters like everyone else I see. Why can't I be like Elevation Church? And I look at them and say, I'm really glad you're not. Not that I don't thank God for successes when they happen, but more often than not, you thought the success was going to indicate the lack of corruption. It never, stuff scales in this world. So when it gets bigger, the corruption grows. When it gets smaller, the corruption shrinks, but it's still there. And so you're really talking about what percentage of corrupt is your church? Maybe that's the goal you should offer. But the problem is, if you do something really dramatic and really amazing in the way that we count success, well, corruption will flood in, baby. But and see, this is the crazy thing about Jesus, is that he's an absolute failure, and he almost embraces his failure in some respects. I mean, he's a success in the Galilee. And then he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And all the consultants said, now, wait a minute, Jesus, you've been doing things pretty well for now, contrary to our conventional wisdom. But that statement there, you're going to lose a big audience because of that. Does Jesus seem to care? You might say he's playing the long game. Well, how long? Well, all the way to the end of the world. That long. Well, how can he play such a long game? Well, because he's not dead. It's nuts, but it's glorious.
Which brings us full circle.
It brings us full circle. Oh, crap, we're out of time. Oh, I came in late. I'm going to have lots of justifications for us to talk again.
Yeah, for sure.
And here I talk too much in your time, too, so I'm sorry about that. But
that's great.
Shoot me an email. We'll set another time to talk, because we got to talk more.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah.